Welcome back to The Explainer. So glad you're here. Ever wonder how a single spot on the map can trigger a massive evolutionary leap for literally all of human history? Well, today we're zeroing in on the Vedic period. We're talking roughly 1500 to 600 BCE and looking at how present-day Uttar Pradesh became the absolute undisputed heartland of ancient India. We are going to trace this wild transition from simple pastoral life to incredibly complex centralized empires and see exactly how the technological, political, and social foundations of an entire culture were laid down.
So here's the core mystery we're unpacking today. How exactly do wandering pastoral tribes build massive territorial empires? Think about it for a second. You've got these groups of nomadic cattle herders who are constantly on the move. How do they just suddenly lock down borders, invent massive bureaucracies, and form enormous kingdoms? What we're about to see is this fascinating domino effect. One seemingly tiny shift triggers another, and then another, until the entire fabric of society is completely rewritten.
Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of empire building, we've got to ground ourselves geographically. In the ancient texts, this central region, what we now call Uttar Pradesh, went by some seriously powerful names: Aryavarta, Brahmarishidesh, and Madhyadesh. This wasn't just a coordinate on a map. Nestled right there in the super-fertile Ganga-Yamuna Doab, this place was literally the cradle where ancient India's intellectual, spiritual, and eventually political traditions were born.
The really crucial thing to understand here is that long before these empires were built out of bricks and borders, the cultural software of the civilization was being coded right here in these plains. The four foundational Vedas, the Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva, were composed and developed here. This is where deep philosophical texts like the Brahmanas and Upanishads come from. It's the birthplace of the epic Ramayana, anchored in Ayodhya, and the Mahabharata, rooted in Hastinapur. Plus, it was home to legendary sages like Bharadvaj, Vashishta, and Vishwamitra. So the intellectual baseline they were starting with was just incredibly rich.
Section 1. The Hardware Update, Iron and Rice. Okay, so we have the cultural software, but now we need to look at the massive technological disruptors that completely upended how these ancient people actually lived. The year is 800 BCE. Pin this date in your mind because this is our critical pivot point. Around this time, a revolutionary technology hits Western Uttar Pradesh, and it is a disruptor on an unprecedented scale. It rapidly accelerates their economy and basically sets the stage for the rest of history. That disruptor? Krishna Ayas, which literally translates to black metal. We're talking about iron. Now, why is this such a game changer? Well, imagine trying to hack your way through the dense, thick jungles of the Gangetic Plains using just copper or bronze. It's pretty much impossible, right? But suddenly, you give these tribes iron axes? They're chopping down dense forests like it's nothing. They're making iron plows and sickles for deep cultivation. And obviously, it completely revolutionized warfare. Iron was the ultimate catalyst. And the immediate result of all this iron technology is a massive agricultural boom. You clear the forests, and those super fertile plains just beg to be farmed. The Vedic people started cultivating rice, which they called vrihi, alongside wheat, known as godhuma, and barley, or yava. And the cool part is, this isn't just guesswork. We actually have the archaeological receipts. Remains of rice from the 8th century BCE were found at Hastinapur and Atranjikera. We even see texts like the Shatapatha Brahmana detailing brand new plowing rituals. Farming became the absolute center of their world. Which leads us to a total economic paradigm shift. Just look at the contrast. In the early Vedic period, you have a pastoral economy. People are nomadic, they're herding cattle, constantly moving, and wealth is literally measured in cows. Fast forward to the later Vedic period, thanks to iron and rice, we've shifted to a settled agricultural economy. People are putting down roots in permanent villages. Suddenly, land is incredibly valuable. Food security goes up, populations explode, and for the very first time, they're producing surplus crops, which kicks off a whole new era of trade. They aren't wandering anymore, they are rooted to the land.
Section 2. Political Evolution, from Tribes to Empires. Because you know what happens when you have permanent settlements, valuable land, and shiny new iron weapons? High-stakes political reorganization.
The trajectory of how these states formed follows a really logical snowball-like sequence. It starts small with the jana, just society organized around fluid, moving tribes. But as they settled down to farm, their identity shifted from the tribe to the territory itself. That gave us the Janapada. These territorial units started swallowing up the smaller tribes, growing into huge, centralized kingdoms, places like Panchala in present-day Bareilly, or Kosala in the east. And this constant merging and conquering eventually built the foundations for those massive, continent-spanning empires we know as the Mahajanapadas.
Naturally, with expanding borders and a booming economy, the boss's job description had to change. Back in the early Vedic period, the king was essentially just an elected tribal chief, kind of like the first among equals. But by the later Vedic period, kings transformed into hereditary, territorial monarchs wielding immense, centralized power. They were suddenly in charge of protecting huge populations, maintaining law and order over vast lands, and controlling the ultimate prize, tax collection.
Now put yourself in their shoes. If you're a newly minted king ruling over endless tracts of prime real estate, you've got to justify that absolute power. So you go divine. The king increasingly became framed as God's literal representative on earth. To cement this, they performed these incredibly elaborate sacrifices. You had the Rajasuya, the grand royal consecration, the Ashwamedha, the famous horse sacrifice, which was basically a massive flex to show absolute military supremacy over your neighbors, and the Vajrayeya, symbolizing pure political and ritual might. These were not just quiet spiritual events, they were gigantic political statements.
Section 3. The societal restructuring. Because let's face it, you literally cannot rewire an entire economy and government without the social fabric completely changing right alongside it.
This is where the four Varnas really crystallized to categorize these new societal roles. With population booms and highly specialized jobs popping up in metalworking, crafts, and trade, the social system became incredibly rigid. Brahmins were the priests and scholars. Kshatriyas were your warriors and rulers. Vaishyas handled trade and agriculture, and Shudras were the service providers. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is how drastically social mobility tanked. Occupations became strictly hereditary, locking a powerful hierarchy into place to manage this massive new society.
Plus, managing this beast of an agrarian society required a deeply organized bureaucracy. One king couldn't do it all himself anymore. We see these new, heavy-hitting administrative roles step up. You've got the Purohita, acting as chief priest in the king's right hand, the Senani, commanding the military, the Gramini, running things down at the village level, and of course, dedicated tax collectors and treasurers. They had to build this incredibly sophisticated machine of governance just to keep the whole shebang running smoothly.
So, if we had to put it all together into one thought, Uttar Pradesh was the nucleus of Vedic civilization, where Vedic literature, agrarian expansion, iron technology, and early state formation collectively shaped the foundations of ancient Indian culture and polity. That is the big takeaway here. It wasn't just one single event. It was this explosive cocktail of intellectual texts, the raw power of the iron axe, the economic surplus of the rice harvest, and wild political ambition that quite literally built the ancient world.
So I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. How much of our modern social and political structure is still just echoing those massive shifts from the later Vedic age? When you look around today at deep-rooted social hierarchies, our massive reliance on agricultural surplus, or even the sprawling bureaucracies that run our modern states, are we literally still feeling the ripples of those very first iron tools striking the forests of Uttar Pradesh all those millennia ago? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.